It is my great pleasure and joy to introduce Jamika Burge. We have been on this for how many years, Jamika?
Too many to count.
Yes, actually, but we are young. We look younger now.
Oh, I'll take that.
So Jamika is a computer science with a degree from Virginia Tech, right? And she has been working on issues of diversity, computer science education for many, many years. She now is principal and founder of Design and Technology Concepts. In the past, she has been a consultant for Google. She had several projects with National Science Foundation. She was intricate part of the Tapia conference
yeah.
where we met.
Yeah.
And it is a great pleasure. It's a really, really
Wow.
great joy
Yes.
to introduce you, Jamika. Give me a
Yay!
call. So
Thank
we are
you.
she's going to be talking about deliciously recursive applying computer science learnings to equity issues in computer science education. Jamika, is all yours.
Oh, thank you. You know, I feel at home. Oh, how nice is that? You know, there aren't many tech conferences where you can go to and feel this at home, right? And so I think even that response to, I told you this morning, the system, right? There's this inherent community that I think computer science education sort of affords. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here with you this morning. I know that I am in a room of some amazing giants. All of you have been in this space or interested in this space for a long time. And so I recognize that I am not the authority, but I only am here to share my own experiences and hopefully hear yours. I am a computer scientist by training, although I don't always act like one, and I certainly don't always look like one. But that's okay, because that's my back pocket card. And I think that's often what gives us the opportunity, or at least gives me the opportunity, to challenge what a computer scientist is and what a computer scientist does, which can actually go a long way to helping our kids see what's possible. So what does that mean for our time today? And we only have really 30 minutes, maybe less than that. And you know, I do have some slides that are just really there for prompts. I'm happy to share them, but hopefully they'll get you to thinking about how we might engage at some point, and also share what you might have considered as what makes sense for you to apply in equity in your own homes, in your own communities. And so I think about what it was like for me growing up and even learning computer science. I didn't start as a computer science major. In fact, I started college as a business major. And it was because, in part, my parents were business owners, but they hadn't gone to college, but they had tried some things and things worked, some things didn't. And so I had this idea that, hey, if I want to do something or be my own boss or do what I want to do, I need to go to school and get a degree in business. So I didn't really connect to computer science until my sophomore year in college, and that was only because I was a work study student in the computer science department during my first year in college. So already there's a progression, right? I'm starting as a business major. In fact, I would have been an English major, except I don't know how I would have made a living, which is totally fine, right? But again, I've been taught, okay, get a job, go to school, do well, but get a job, right? And so thinking about what that meant for me was really important, and not really even knowing that computer science existed for me as an option. Didn't know what engineering was, but was really great in math. I loved math. I took AP math and biology and English, but still it didn't occur to me that technology or tech was something for me to do. And so in thinking about the larger context of my own experience and what it means to think about, come on in, we're all family, to really think about what computer science could do for me, I think I struggled the most with the hardness, the difficulty of it, right? Computer science is not easy. And anything really worth having and learning is likely going to be filled with its own challenges. But that didn't resonate for me because I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to be excelling all the way. There are no C's, there are no B's, right? And so that was my lived experience of thinking, well, maybe I should be doing something different. And I actually doubted myself so much so that every time I met someone who was in computer science or working in the field, I said, you know what, I feel like I'm just not getting it. What am I missing? And inherently, everyone would say to me, you're doing the right things, it's supposed to be this way, but at least if you're happy and you keep persisting, you'll be okay. And in my mind, that didn't seem to be enough, right? But it really was. And then coming to terms with what that meant for me was actually really liberating. And it's in many ways why I persisted in computer science, not because I wanted to build the next best killer app, which is really fascinating for a lot of people, and it's really great if you do, But for me, it was to keep learning and to figure out where could I really apply this niche for myself in a meaningful way. And so thinking about computing and even thinking more broadly about what it means to have access, I think about what it means to be connected to a network that allows us to really connect wherever we are, right? And the benefit of being connected to a high-speed internet, for example, to have lightning-fast access, means that you're willing to pay for it. You're willing to pay the cost. You're willing to show a little bit of extra money or get the high-speed cables to really stay connected and to have access. But what if that's not the option? What if we're not designing for that as the end game? Not because that isn't really a priority. For example, how many of you have been traveling and your internet isn't working? And so you look for the ways to connect, perhaps that are free, but the free isn't as optimal as you'd like it to be. And so there are these opportunities then to engage not with the best because you've paid for it, but because it's available, right? So how do we create this sense of shifting from knowing that CS is certainly about finding the best solution, but what if it's finding the best solution equitably? And what does that mean? What does it mean to be equitable, first of all, right? Does it really mean that we're focusing on understanding the context of which everybody who is a potential user is affected? I think that's part of it, right? I think part of it's also considering that the folks who are in the room developing and thinking about the problem also are representative of the people who will be using that in space, that in technology, right? I think that's part of it. And it's also recognizing that just because I know something or have experience or expertise in something, it doesn't mean that I know it all. And recognizing that the world is bigger than my own purview really, I think, is an important way of thinking about this. And we often say, let's create these programs or let's create these opportunities for our students of color or for women or for girls to stay engaged. And so we think about what is it that it really connects with these communities. And I argue that instead of creating for a Black experience or for a women's experience, just create a good experience, right? Because we lose track of what's really important. And often we lose things like rigor. We're not able to really think about the clarity with which people are really understanding the content. And we're focusing on the wrong things. And so I'd like to think that if we're focusing on equity, then we're focusing on those challenges that are inherent to our experiences. And I happen to be a Black girl, so indulge me a little bit to talk about why I think equity is so important in this space. Last year, end of the summer, early part of the fall last year, The Atlantic came out with an article. Some of you might have read this. How many of you seen this? Black girls are presumed less innocent. They're assumed to be more adult, and they don't need to be protected. What does that feel like? Have you ever felt unprotected? What did that feel like? And imagine being a kid and not having anything to do with that perception, but that's how people treat you. That's how we have to deal against those perceptions. Here's another one. Black girls are twice as likely to be suspended in every state. Not because they don't do anything wrong. I mean, they're kids, just like anybody else. But the perception is that they're going to be trouble when they walk in the door, right? Why is that? Well, we're trying to challenge what that means in terms of hearing the lived experiences of these kids, of these students, and transforming that into a way for them to really embrace computing. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means later. But I'm trying to set a picture here, and most recently in the New York Times a few weeks ago, we learned that Black boys, no matter if they grew up rich or poor, are more likely to be left out of wealth as a wealth opportunity, as building their own opportunities to grow their own wealth. Just inherently. There's very little that happens to shift that narrative, unfortunately. And you see a pretty big gap here on the left-hand side. So what does it matter that we ask the questions about why should we not presume that our girls are innocent? Well, kids are kids. Why wouldn't we presume them innocent, right? We should be protecting our kids. But often it's those behaviors that leak into our own psyche, our own biases, whether we expect it or not, that sort of permeate often the way we interact with each other, right? So that might not be your experience when you're in my camp or when you're in my class, but I know that some have that experience. So how do I deal with that? How do we acknowledge those realities for a lot of people, a lot of students, and recognize that there's an opportunity to shift that. And I think by thinking about what computer science more broadly, because I am a techie, again, I mentioned earlier, I may not look at, and I certainly don't act like it. I think I call myself a behavioral computer scientist because I'm much more interested in how to design and develop for real people and for real experiences. And to be truthful, that's also why I kept going to school. I had to keep finding something that I liked. And by the time I got to my doctorate degree, I learned about this thing called human-computer interaction and human-centered design, which nowadays has morphed into design thinking and some other ideas, which we'll get to as well. But it allowed me to find a home and really recognize what this computer science thing meant, but also how we might apply it in real ways, right? So we can begin, in my mind, at least for me, and I'd be curious to know if others have thought about this too, begin with the end user in mind. We started in software development, the software development life cycle is thinking about what it means to really design applications, software applications for real people, for users. And then that morphed into usability engineering. Well, now we're using human-centered design to really understand how we can create systems, applications that are user-friendly, that are usable, and that really provide the kind of experience, and we didn't call it experience at the time, but provide a level of engagement that allows us to recognize that we're not just developing this thing, we're developing it for people, right? People as the common denominator, as that unit of analysis. But we didn't go quite far enough. And I argue again that now with the design thinking, it actually is a different way of looking at it. It's a different way of really solving the same problems. It's a human-centered design framework. It's focused on really understanding the business needs, connecting with the creativity of our problem solving, connected with the technology that affords the opportunity to provide some level of engagement or experience, especially at the business level. In my day job, I work at Capital One, and so I'm leading and really supporting communities of practice. That is, designers who are of various skills and various levels of expertise. So how do we bring these folks together, our content designers, along with our design researchers, along with our service designers, our design thinkers, even as a way of solving problems, and recognizing that we're really all speaking the same language, but we're just using different words, right? Or we're trying to get at the same bottom line, but our perspectives are a little bit different. So how do we connect along those dots in a way that allows us to not only create these products and services that change making for good, right? But the way we do it matters. And the way we even engage with our colleagues matter. So empathy isn't just about, or really understanding our users isn't just about our customers, but it's about the way we do our own work, right? And empathy, I use that word empathy, I think even in terms of a skill or of an ability to be able to connect with people is massive. I would love to hear a thought from anyone who's so willing and so moved. How have you used or seen empathy in your work that you do? Or maybe you'd like to see more. Anybody? Yes, please.
I teach 8th grade computer science, and right now they're doing an app design challenge, and so they have to do an empathy map for their user, and they chose a grade level to work with, and then they're interviewing. So today's interview day, and they have interviewing their client, and then they have to do their empathy map after.
I love that, right?
And, yeah.
Well, it's mixing the qualitative research, which often is seen as a soft science. There's nothing techie about that. I would beg to differ, but I think it helps us to design the right ways. But what we learn about ourselves in that process is magnificent, right? That's another hand.
So in my research scholarship in AI, in my research scholarship in AI, I studied influence and how you change attitudes, or how you actually, people are shaped by the things that they read and hear over the news, shifting attitudes, values, and beliefs, and connecting with people using just the plain text, right? Coming over to the to the community work that I do, my STEAM and Global Citizenship program, this year we're focusing on seniors, because unfortunately some of our kids don't know anyone older than 70, so that's almost me. So I said we'll work with our seniors to build out VR experiences for them. So our students are going to the seniors to basically extract the data and do the data science portion, and then we'll have the VR experiences. We'll have them
That's right.
create those.
And how do you do that if you don't understand what it's like, to your own words, to be a 70-year-old, right? I mean, the idea is that there are people whose experiences are different from our own. And looking at those gender experiences or those cross-generational experiences are really fascinating. I really like this definition of design thinking. There are lots of definitions, there are lots of ways we can describe it, but I like this one because it pulls together some really important dynamics when we think about equity in computer science education. An iterative process in which we seek to understand the user, challenge assumptions, and redefine problems that we thought we knew we understood. Now, we might have been right, but we're open to the opportunity to learn something new. How amazing is that, to think about that as a process of design and of learning, that allows us the opportunity to be wrong, or to learn something new, or to ever be evolving in the context of understanding that at the end of the day, what we're doing really does matter to people, right? It matters to the individuals who are going to be using it. It matters to us because we may be as well. And I'm happy to share my slides if you didn't get a picture. And I also love this phase graph of design thinking because it reminds me certainly of software development and the phases that we go through. But what I really enjoy about this, which is available on nielsennormangroup.com, they do a lot of research on usability and user research. But what I love about this particular rendering is that it includes implement as a phase. And as a computer scientist, yes, and, right? Because we're not just developing to have fun, and that's great, but we're moving towards something. Sometimes it's a minimum MVP, sometimes it's something that we actually have been iterating on for a while, but we're moving towards something. So we're able to connect people, the empathy, which is the first really important phase of design thinking, iterate as we need to and go back if we miss something, because we're learning something new, but then we're moving towards this phase of delivering something, some product, which we hope has value. So my takeaway from this first piece, and I'm looking at our time, wow, time is flying, is we can't teach our students CS without getting to know them, their own behaviors and their own expectations. So herein is a perfect opportunity to take that learning about how we better understand the people who use our products to understanding the students who learn our craft, right? And what does that mean to really provide an opportunity to learn who they are? Well, many of you are working with students even now, and you've heard some really fascinating experiences that they've shared that might have been counter to what you thought might have been reality for them. There might have been a way for you to learn something new about the student that you support. And so even in that data point, if you will, there was an opportunity to learn more, a little bit more, about who we're serving. What if we did that more systematically? From the very first time a student, at whatever age, learns computer science, we're also thinking about what does it mean to understand who you are, what your own expectations are, how your experiences and your own personal behaviors impact your work, because they do. They do. So let's keep moving. Learning number 2, computing is all around us. I wish I'd known that as a sophomore, right? Instead of thinking, oh, I'm in the lab, I can't get this compiler to work, what's gonna happen if I don't fix this, right? But my level of understanding wasn't that big. And that's natural. You're learning, you're figuring things out. But how amazing to know that, again, right when you're learning this stuff, the intuition is, I'm learning this because it's helping me to apply this to larger problems. It's not helping me necessarily be a better problem solver. Hopefully that's a skill that you learn or you grow and you develop. But computer science really helps us to figure out how to solve some really hard problems that affect everybody, right? But thinking about what ubiquitous computing was. When I was in school, we called it ubiquitous computing or pervasive computing. Now it's shifted to what we might call Internet of Things, right? You can walk in the house and the fridge says your dinner's ready, right? What does it mean to be that connected? I don't know if I'm ready for that, but it's coming, which makes it all the more important for us to help train ourselves and our students with recognizing that all of us are part of this economy of scale when technology is involved. And if we're not thinking about that, then when we walk into the house and the refrigerator doesn't quite work, what does that mean? Or I don't have broadband. Can I even participate, right? Or if my internet is down and there's this connection to how I'm able to live and subsist in my own home, What are the implications of that? And how do we ensure that everybody doesn't have access to everything all the time, regardless of your socioeconomics? Okay? But I want to focus on that piece, that social implication piece. I mentioned earlier that some of the work that I'm doing really does work for trying to encourage the work that we do to be directly informed by our students. I'm not expecting you to understand this, but I'm giving some context. I'm working with a couple of researchers, Ryoko Yamaguchi from UNC Greensboro and Patricia from University of Michigan, on developing this framework for Black girls. And the goal of our work is to not just support a system that supports Black girls, but to use this really powerful and existing engagement model around Black girls and empowerment and leadership and cultural support that already provides a really amazing mechanism for community building. And that community is Black Girls Rock. If you're familiar with Black Girls Rock, it's an organization started out of New York City, executive director of Beverly Bond. And the idea is every year she celebrates through an award show Black women and Black girls. Because already we know that we're seen as less innocent. We're seen as those who are more likely to get into trouble early on. And those behaviors, or at least those expectations, persist through adulthood, right? It just is the way it is. So what we're trying to do is use an existing model of incredible empowerment and wrap around it this idea that computing can be an amazing vehicle to do the very things that you find important in your lives. And in part of that analysis, we've uncovered on the left-hand side some really interesting topics that when girls are applying to participate in this leadership program, they're asked to submit this application, which includes an essay. It has them to talk about things that are important to them. It has them to talk about those things that they want to accomplish in life. Most frequently, through content analysis that Patricia has done for us, we see that there are 3 major areas that come up pretty consistently. Does that look like feedback from a student who sees her world as limited? Power and empowerment, right? There's a lot going on there. Technology. They may not understand the context under which they want to be technologists or what that might mean for them, but they know it's important and they know they want to be involved in some way. Social justice and social issues, that social implications piece. How do we make sense of this computing thing in the sense that these girls can identify it with it in a way that helps them to be participants? You know, we hear a lot about shifting students from being consumers only to participants, and it's important, we should. But what kind of producers are we producing? Are we teaching? Are we training? And how engaged are they in the dynamic of what it means to be a producer? So I showed that because this gives us an opportunity to really go against and to de-confirm what is our assumption that our Black girls are beyond being saved, that they're beyond the ones who are going to succeed. And this says otherwise. So more to come on that. I don't want to spend a lot of time there, but I wanted to share that. So my takeaway is the way we experience computing may not be the way our students do. So better understanding what that means is going to be really imperative. And the third one, these are not exhaustive, but these are just high-level views as I was musing about this, how do we spend our time together, is to create fault-tolerant systems. Certainly as technologists, as computer scientists, and some of you know this area much better than I do, there's an opportunity to build and design systems that allow us to recover more quickly should any subcomponent or subprocessor fail, right? Which is what we want. I mean, the fact that we're able to use our phones, our cell phones, most often without having to deal with a reboot is a good thing, right? Especially when you're using your phone to check in at the airport, you don't want it to crash on you, or when you're trying to figure out where your directions are and you're lost and you're 15 minutes late, you don't want the system to crash because of something else that's happening on the phone that you're not aware of. So we need those kinds of systems. But what we know from the literature is that fault-tolerant systems aren't really completely fault-tolerant. We can't really design in a meaningful way for every single thing that could go wrong. That's just hard to do. That's really difficult. So there are some failures that are actually allowed to happen because there's really no way we can deal with it. So for example, if a processor or even part of the system itself fails, if your application or your software that's running on top of it is pristine, you can't account for a processor falling or failing, right? A component, a hardware component. You can't really account for that. So how do you deal with those kinds of exchanges? And how do you deal with the fact that you may not always get it right, or that you're going to allow some level of failure into the system? Well, I like to think of it this way. Some failures are okay. So I can deal with it. If you meet me for the first time and forget my first name, forget where I come from, that's okay. That's minor. No big deal, right? Mistakes are going to happen. You learn from them, you move on. And we also learn that failure is actually okay. In the grand scheme of things, learning how to transform your thinking into being a risk taker in a good way, right? In a way that allows you to learn something new and to show high return. I mean, that's what eagers are for NSF. We had those opportunities ourselves. So thinking about the ways that we actually can take an opportunity and transform it. And if we don't get it right, that's okay. So I like to think of it as giving a pass for yourself to not be perfect in anything that you do. And so we should accept that some things are unavoidable. But you know what? Some failures are non-negotiable, right? And what does that mean? That means that we have to be very specific about what those failures are. So let me give you an example, but then I'd love to move into questions and some feedback here. We know that biases are real, which is really the focus of that third takeaway there. If my lived experience is as a black woman, because it's who I am, it's how God made me, or as someone who has a disability, or as someone who is not a native English speaker, you fill in the blank. You've worked with and supported many students and colleagues who might fall into those categories, or you might yourself. But that doesn't necessarily mean limited capacity, but that's often the assumption. Oh, you're not able to get this, you can't learn it. We see far too few of you, so that must mean that you don't have the capacity. You're not able, you're not gonna get this, right? That's a bias that I still deal with as an adult. My different experiences means inferior. It means that I can't add value. That's an assumption that is part of our daily fabric, right? We assume a lot in the process of the work that we do, even unconsciously. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time there because we know this. This is, we're all family. We know this stuff, right? Or that my scholarship is unique. Oh, you're one of those smart ones, right? You're one of those who is different because you get it. Others don't, but you do, right? We still hear that. I still hear that. And that's crazy, right? I mean, it's crazy. What we also know is that the scales are a lot more balanced than we give credit. A lot more balanced. But we often don't know how to make that the case or how to see it that way. Diversity of ideas and inclusive participation is about more than ensuring women and minorities are engaged. It's more than that. I mean, that's the bare minimum, right? And the motivations for pursuing computing careers also varies. And not just for people of color or women, but for all of us. It just so happened that my experience didn't include growing up taking computers apart. That wasn't my experience. If I had, that'd have been great, but that wasn't my experience, right? And others had that experience. Even some of my black sisters and brothers had that as an experience. And they're in tech. Some aren't. It just is what it is, right? But motivations are different. And for me, as I mentioned earlier, it was to get a job. I need to get a job when I graduated. And for some in our community, or some for our young people, especially when economics is an issue, it's an issue of going to grad school or getting a job, right? And that's a big deal. It's a really big deal for families. Intersectional experiences are important. A lot of my research is on intersectionality for Black women and girls, which really means how do we recognize the experiences, the breadth of experiences of people, of Black women, of women in general. And we can recognize by learning that I'm not just a Black woman, but I'm from the South. How many of you are from the South? Okay, cool. I may not sound like it, but I'm from the South. That's all right, that's all right. How many of you are from the Northwest? Yeah? How many of you from the Northeast? Look at how different you are, right? So it's the same thing. sorry, Midwest. I'm sorry, I can't stop. Midwest, Southwest, outside the U.S. Yeah? See, and the immigrant experience is another one, right? What does that mean? What does that look like? But at the end of the day, recognizing that we're really more similar than we are different, but we don't allow ourselves to embrace that reality. And so we have issues like, oh, we have to support our black students, we have to support our brown students, we have to support our women, because we don't start off recognizing them as just as important as those who don't look like them. So what choice do we have but to separate ourselves or feel that we have to own our own voices because nobody else owns it or supports us otherwise? Because that's what happens often, right? So I want to end real quickly, and then we do have some time for questions. You know, we started by talking about this as a recursive experience, right? Thinking about what kinds of CS learnings, and I see your hand, thank you. Thinking about what kinds of CS learnings can we apply to CS education, which is an exercise of recursion to some extent. But I'd like to argue that it's probably more of an iterative process, right? Because we have to add to what we know and recognize that where we start isn't necessarily where we're going to end. And that's okay, because we're evolving. Even as a discipline, we're still trying to figure out how to define computer science, right? So we have to be okay with the fact that equity means that we have to shift the way we think, but also shift the way we start. So that's my time, but I would love to hear more about how you think about this. Why is equity, not why it's important, but what is it that you do in this space that helps you to think more differently about the importance of equity, not just for yourself, but also for your students, for your colleagues? Curious, any thoughts? I used to be a teacher, so I'm okay with giving time and space for folks to be the first one. Yes, please.
So my question is about how you, learn about people and include diverse voices, but not make people like the token in the room, right? So, oh, let's go ask the woman, right? Or let's go ask the black girl, something like that. How do you balance that kind of?
Yeah, well, it's not about asking the black girl. It's about asking the students in your program, right? And often we have to ask ourselves and our own students, who are you? How do you want to be identified? Because you might call me an underrepresented minority. I call myself Jamika, right? So how do we call the groups that we're trying to serve when we also call them a term that really doesn't amplify them in any way? We're under? What are we under? Right? So asking them who they are instead of saying, you know what, let's talk to Felicia or Jamika, right, about her experiences, because that absolutely calls the person out. Ask everybody, what's your own experience? Because I think we'd be surprised at how much we can learn from the white students or the white boys who also need to be part of that conversation. Okay, thank you for the question and for going first. We have, I think, 3 more minutes. I want to stay on schedule. I would love to hear another question or even observation.
Yes. Related to that, so we're a grassroots organization, and we get a lot of pushback about the power bubble, right? And so I agree with everything you said. What we're trying to tackle now is how do we make equity everyone's work?
Yeah.
Instead of people of color, women, minorities. And I'm wondering,
It's a heavy load, right?
It's a very heavy load. It's when people don't want to hear, because from the feedback we get, when I hear the word equity, all that means is what is going to be.
Yeah.
So is there work
Yeah.
that you're interested in that's looking at that we
Yeah.
might be able to?
Yeah, and I think part of it is, similar to my response earlier, it's delineating the color and the difference, but focusing on how we're really similar. And from a business perspective, we say that, okay, if we want D&I to be a part of the work that we're doing, make it part of our performance reviews, right? Tie it to some bottom line that you can be measured against it, so at the end of the year, you can be measured against how engaged you were or how important you were in this space. I think that helps, but I think it's another way of delineating the real issue, right? If all of us recognize that fairness and equal access is important to everybody, and even to me, is very different. It's a very different conversation than to say, you know what, we need to think about how to engage our minorities and our women. That already is exclusive, and it's dealing with an other group. And often, we don't have the right conversations about equity really isn't just for people of color or women, it's for everybody. Right? And a really great example is technologies, accessibility technologies. Text messaging, which I can't live without, really wasn't designed for me, right? It was designed to support accessibility needs, screen readers, or other kinds of tools that really help people who have impairments that keep them from communicating and from participating. But others of us use it as well. I also use closed captioning on my TVs. I just do. Maybe I'm a nerd, like to read, I don't know, but I use it, right? But that's the very point. We use technologies that really are defined for those who don't have access, but they end up being useful for everybody. That's the point of equity. It isn't singling anybody out. It's recognizing that from the beginning, all of us are important. All of us have voices. And we need to recognize that that's part of the work that we do. Yes, sir. Please, last question.
I help underrepresented people become software engineers. And one of my observations has been the importance of helping underrepresented folks feel their confidence. The reality, as you said, is there's a lot of societal biases that are trying to sort of restrain you. And there are also a lot of visible role models in certain fields. It's just reality. So a lot of the folks I work with, they've never met a software engineer that they look up to. But one thing I thought was helpful is just like telling people, hey, you're good enough. Or you can do it. It's a one step at a time journey. I'm gonna help you get to the next step. And doing that, not just me as a Black person, but also having people who aren't Black do that. Because it's often awkward. I know so many people who aren't like underrepresented, and you want to help. It's like, well, I don't know what the right word should be. I don't want to offend. One thing I always find helpful is just reminding people that they're good at certain things, and that builds that confidence that they can do it. Every story I've heard of like a underrepresented person like at a high level, it's always like, oh, I remember that teacher who told me I was good when everybody thought I wasn't.
Yeah.
And how now I'm like the head of this. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to remind the room of that.
No. I wish we got gold stars as adults, but we don't. There's something about getting that confirmation, right, that you've done something well. That lasts, so thank you for that. And I'm grateful, because you all are my gold stars. Thank you for coming this afternoon. I want to keep you on schedule, but maybe we can talk after? Thank you so much.